Hey everyone, it's Sarah back with my vlog, Faith at Home Not Alone. And I have a special episode this month. I had an interview with licensed counseling therapist Carrie Gaskin-Fowler, and we talked about parenting children with ADHD. And I know I got a lot out of it. I think you will as well, not just for children with ADHD, but just parenting in general. And I hope it's an encouragement to you. I did put the whole interview in one episode. I just thought there was so much in there, it's hard to break it up. And I thought once you start, you just want to keep listening. So you have the whole interview here, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Carrie. Thank you for meeting with us today and talking about, we're going to be talking about ADHD, children with the characteristic of ADHD. Is that how you would phrase that?
Yeah, that's kind of, I think I would phrase it that way.
Okay. So just tell us a little bit about your background and kind of where you're coming from in talking about this topic.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a licensed counseling therapist and a Canadian certified counselor. My practice encompasses all ages from 5 to 95. Individuals, groups, and families. I do a lot of work. I'm finding in the last year or two especially, I do a lot of work in the field of ADHD and executive functioning. Working via video, and here at the farm working with our horses as part of our therapeutic programs. So that's kind of my clinical side. And I do come from a faith perspective. You know, my relationship with Christ informs my daily life.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. So I just have a few questions I was going to go through, and I want to give you freedom if it should be rephrased or reframed.
Sure.
Feel free to, yeah. So,
okay.
Is there any preliminary understanding that we need to have before talking about children who have ADHD? Like, are there terms that we should understand, or even just kind of understanding the what it is that they're dealing with? Because some people might see it as maybe a mental illness, or they might see it as just behavior issue. Like, how would we understand ADHD?
Sure. So one of the things that's really important to note is that ADHD is challenging. It's challenging for the individual who lives with ADHD. It's challenging for the families. And ADHD is a characteristic, right? It's part of our brain functioning. It's something that affects our executive functioning skills. And so there's kind of a continuum of 8 executive functioning skills. So when we talk about ADHD, we're really talking about those things and how those impact behavior, how those impact the capacity for tasks, how those impact interpersonal relationships, how those impact self-worth and self-value, how those impact capacity for starting and completing tasks, impulsivity, and so on. So it's really important that we understand that this is not about bad behavior, about poor discipline, about, that kid is just out of control. This is really about the way that the brain functions, and that the brain functions differently.
Okay, that's interesting. And can you just define a bit more what is executive function of the brain?
Sure, because we throw that term around and people hear, oh, well, executive functioning issues. So executive functioning really is the set of mental skills that help us complete tasks. Like, that's the most basic description. So they would include things like working memory, emotional control, organization. Those executive functioning skills, sorry, I'm a hand talker, help us to learn, to work, to function in our day-to-day lives. So anyone who struggles with executive dysfunction, right, because if it's not functioning, it's dysfunction, often find it difficult to learn, because it's a real struggle to stay focused. It's a struggle to handle difficult emotions. It's a struggle to find materials, follow directions, even to make good choices, just because of the way the brain functions. And so the 8 kind of categories of executive function would include self-control, which would be the ability to stop and think and take a breath before taking action. Self-monitoring, which would be the ability to kind of view oneself, kind of have that step outside and see oneself externally, and to make self-evaluation. Emotional control. I'm just kind of going through the list in my head. Sorry. Emotional control, which would be the ability to manage our feelings and to complete, achieve goals and tasks with all these emotions. Flexibility. So, which would be, of course, the ability to adapt to changing conditions, to be able to revise plans, change your strategies, and so on. We often find in ADHD that there could be some rigidity because flexibility is hard. Task initiation, that'd be our fifth one. So this is that just like getting started. And folks who live with ADHD often complain of what we call analysis paralysis, right? You just get stuck in getting started. So that task initiation is that ability to start and finish tasks without that procrastination piece. Organizational skills, so that ability to develop systems, use those systems to keep track of our materials, keep track of our information. I already referenced working memory, and that's that ability to use the information that we've already received and it's held in memory in order to complete a task. And then finally would be planning and time management. I have these running lists in my brain, and that's really the ability not just to reach a goal, but to create the steps to get to that goal. And so those are the things that, if you live with ADHD, if you have ADHD, these are the executive functioning skills that we're talking about that may be a little bit more challenging for you.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking how so many of those are just assumed. Like we assume the ability to do those things or the ability to grow in them in a progressive way. So depending on the person, would they be unique in which functions are more challenging than others? So is it kind of a unique combination?
Yeah, it really can be. Most of those will exist to some degree. And again, just like anything else about humans, we're unique, right? So full disclosure, I have ADHD. And I have no issue with kind of that emotional regulation. I have no difficulty with flexibility. But man, oh man, oh man, oh man, task initiation gets me every time, right? I have ideas, or as I age, the working memory piece, and that may be an aging piece as well, but that's one of those challenges. So those pieces, and of course, as I've gotten older, I've developed systems for myself to help me with these things. But they do exist differently. I have other family members where planning and time management, emotional control, self-evaluation are very challenging, right? So it does kind of show up in greater or lesser degrees depending on the individual.
Okay, good. I'm hoping the connection stays good. You're pausing a little bit, but I think it'll be okay.
Okay, I hope so. This is the perks and perils of living rurally.
Yeah. Well, I can have it in our neighborhood too. Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. So what challenges do parents specifically have with children who have maybe it's diagnosed or undiagnosed ADHD? What would be some unique challenges for them as parents?
I think one of the challenges is that, we have expectations, right? When you hold that baby for the first time, or that child for the first time, you've created this whole story for that child's life in your head as a parent. And before we're parents, we all know that we're going to have that perfect child who never is disruptive, who never is disrespectful, who never, and then we become parents. We're like, oh, really, it's not that easy. And what's really hard is that children want to behave. Children want to be seen, to be loved. And one of the things that we can get stuck with as parents, particularly parents of kids with ADHD, is that all of those kind of traditional parenting skills just don't seem to work, right? Timeouts, lectures, threatens, consequences, they just don't seem to work in that ADHD child. And to be honest, most parents are good parents, right? They want to do well, they want to do right by their kids. But if your kid has ADHD, good may not be good enough. We have to find a way to create a very peaceful and calm home environment with structure. The calm environment is really easy. It's really important. It's not easy. It's really important. So when your child is dysregulated because maybe they're struggling with that emotional control piece, it's really hard to have a peaceful, calm environment. As a parent, when you know that you need to be out the door for 8 a.m. and your child with ADHD maybe also has sensory processing issues, because that could be a coexisting concern, and the sock seam is just hitting wrong. And that then causes that emotional dysregulation because we just can't find the right socks. And in your head as the parent, you're going, we need to get out the door. It's time to go. Just put on, I don't care what socks you wear. Just put on any socks. Why are the socks bothering you? Get over it. But for that child, this is a really mountainous thing. It's huge, right? And it's impossible to get through. So what we're doing is we're escalating, right? And amplifying the situation because of our sense of urgency about time. And this child has this sense of urgency around, this sock is going to make me uncomfortable and unable to focus on anything else for the entirety of this day, right? And so now the child is shutting down. And so this turns into the threats. If you don't get there on time, you're going to lose your tablet, you're going to lose your time to play with Johnny, whatever, which then amplifies the situation even further. And that's really challenging. I mean, that's one of the big things we hear a lot about is the difference in priorities, because our priority as a parent is to get out the door, get the food eaten, get the bath taken. And the priority of that child with ADHD may be very, very different based on what the internal conversation is.
Wow, yeah. So that's very helpful to get that inside picture of what's going on. So what are some things that you recommend to parents, or how would you counsel parents to enter into maybe a different way of approaching these things?
So the first step is get our own house in order, right? That means that we need to be grounded, centered, calm, regulated. So get our own stuff organized, right? Our own internal stuff, which is hard because we all have our own things to deal with too. And if you're living in a household where maybe parents also have ADHD, and we could be looking at quite a storm. I really encourage practicing the power of the pause, right? In that moment when that child is completely melting down, and a meltdown is not a tantrum, and I really do want to make that distinction. A tantrum has a specific manipulative motivation. A meltdown is a complete and utter dysregulation that is not within that child's control. Two totally separate things. When a child is having that meltdown, practice the pause. Instead of diving in there and saying, come on, Johnny, get going. You as the parent, step back, take a breath. And I know that when it's Monday morning and we're trying to get to the bus on time, it doesn't seem like that's something that's doable. And oftentimes like it really feels impossible. A 30-second pause to breathe, to step away, is not going to substantially impact your day, but it may substantially impact that child. So take that pause, breathe. I really highly recommend something called 4-7-8 breathing for both parents and children. And it's to inhale through your nose for 4, hold for 7, and exhale through the mouth for 8. And that helps to activate our autonomic nervous system to help calm things, helps reduce the production of that stress hormone, cortisol, right? Which is really important. Slow our heart rate, slow our breathing rate, which then allows us to be in a better physiological state for that child. It also gives us that moment to pause and think before we take that next step, right? And that's so important because we know that when things are rushed, when we have that big state of urgency, we can often say or do things that later we go, oh, man, I really shouldn't have said that to my kid. He's not a spoiled little brat. He was really tired. We overstimulated. Oh, I'm the world's worst parent. And then the shame cycle begins, right? So if we just take that pause, that can make a massive, massive, massive difference.
Yeah, that's great, because I'm thinking in other ways that the pause can be applied in our life as well.
Yeah, it can. And I recommend that for everyone. And what's really interesting, and I'll share this story. We use this breathing in our practice all the time because it does regulate. It's a good co-regulating breathing. Humans are built for connection. We're created that way. And co-regulation pre-exists self-regulation. Co-regulation happens in the womb, right? Co-regulated respiration and heartbeat and so on. And one day we were using this breathing technique with a group that we're working with. And my husband, who works with me in our equine practice, said the Philippians kept coming to his head, Philippians 4:7-8. And Philippians 4:7-8 is, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, right? Well, when we take that breath, what are we doing? We're practicing that peace, right? And I thought that was such perfect mirroring. That was, that's that Holy Spirit speaking to us right then and there. Here we are practicing this breath of 4-7-8, and it mirrors perfectly the scripture that talks about guarding our hearts and minds, focusing on what is good and pure and honorable and true. And if we do that as parents, if we look at our child and say, this child isn't trying to be disruptive or bad or disrespectful, I'm going to focus on what's good and pure and true about this child. This child is a child of Christ. He's a child of God, and he's perfect. And I'm blessed to be the steward of this child here on earth and to be his parent. So I'm going to focus on what's good and true and pure about this child to help me parent that child with ADHD.
Yeah, that's great. You kind of anticipated my question of, how is faith a key component of parenting children? There's parenting children, period, but then there's parenting children who have maybe extra needs or different needs than we anticipate. And is there anything else that you could say about that?
Well, I think that, really modeling our faith is important. And if you look at kind of just looking at scripture around the issues of attentiveness, right? God teaches us that some tasks are hard, but it's important for us to be faithful with our tasks. So teaching our children and modeling, more than anything, we model for our children, right? We model faithfulness in our tasks. If we look at Proverbs 6-8, we understand that staying focused is hard. So we teach our children about Proverbs 12:11. If we think about self-control, right? We talk about this as a fruit of the Spirit, right? And we see the kids at youth groups singing about the song about the fruits of the Spirit. Well, we forget about self-control sometimes, right? So we model that. And maybe modeling that is leaving that bowl of chips on Saturday night and not having it, right? Maybe that self-control is not, muttering under our breaths in road rage when the traffic is horrific. It's sometimes those micro actions that show Christ-like behavior, because we're called to follow and be like Christ, that our children see. It's not always the face-to-face, I'm talking to you, giving you a lecture about how to be a Christ follower and how to be a good child and how to live with your ADHD. It is so often in those small things that we see that our children learn, right? So we spend time with that, teaching our children about having a servant's heart, modeling that, and understanding that our kids will get dysregulated. Even kids without ADHD are going to get overstimulated, overwhelmed. And I'll share this strategy that we use in our house. My ADHD comes with anxiety, which often manifests as short-temperedness, right? Not my most pleasant trait, but I will own it, okay? I had read something, I had been reading, and it's a Facebook meme or something that said, what would you do if you had 24 hours left in your life? If you knew you had 24 hours left, and everybody writes, hop on a plane, do this. And then it finishes with, Jesus knew and he washed feet. And that hit me really hard about what a servant's heart looks like. So now, when I start to get escalated or get a little bit short-tempered with my kids, my 6-year-old will say, Mommy, will you wash my feet? And so we sit down and I wash feet. And in that moment of taking that pause, it allows me to be a servant, to be a steward, and to remember that this is my job, is to nurture and support, to build up, not to punish, but to correct, but to be in that moment of humility. And that can be so helpful for that child with ADHD, that child who is hyperstimulated, that child who is overwhelmed, because there's such intimacy in that act that it's really hard for either of us to stay dysregulated.
Wow, yeah, that's very a powerful illustration and act. Yeah, because I do think it's easy as parents sometimes to get on maybe like a power trip or feel like we have to be in that place of control all the time, or else we're failing somehow. So I appreciate that.
It is.
Yeah, I just I wondered if you have any thoughts on how the church can support families who have children with ADHD, if there's anything that the church can do as a community.
Sure. And I think part of it is becoming informed, right? Knowledge is important, right? We need to understand compassion, right? Maybe taking a breath and saying, okay, that kid who's always running up and down the aisles during service, maybe that's not that they're poorly behaved. Maybe that's their way of regulating their body, right? Because we heard the term stimming, which is personal stimulation to help regulate. So there's often physical stimulation. So you might see somebody who rocks, somebody who shifts or bounces their leg. I often will have a pen or an elastic or something. We could, as a church, as a community, as a family, look at that child and that family and say, okay, can I help you? Can I take your child for a walk? Can I go out in the lobby and spin circles with your child? What do you need? What do you need as a parent? So learning, understanding that the behavior is not disruptive. Ask the family, what do you need? Maybe some families aren't okay with their kids moving around a lot during service or vocalizing during service, but they would really value being able to go to the family room and watch the service, right? So asking instead of judging, because we're not called to judge.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Just wanted to ask if there was anything else that you think would be important that you'd like to share.
ADHD requires a diagnosis, right? Typically with children, diagnosis is done by a psychologist. It's a fairly long assessment process. I would remind families that ADHD can show up differently in boys and girls. It can have very different gender manifestations. I would also, really encourage people to note that ADHD diagnoses in women often happen much later in life, 30s, 40s. For many young women, they're diagnosed with anxiety and depression when in fact it's been untreated ADHD for many years. So I would just really, if you notice something in your child that just doesn't resonate as being right or true, or you're concerned about, talk to your doctor, talk to your pediatrician, talk to your therapist, ask the question, say, hey, look, I have some questions about this and I want to help my kid. And know that, some children need medication, some don't, right? And that everybody is different, and that we need to be open to the therapeutic tools, to the resources, and there are amazing resources out there. And if I could share a couple of really great resources, there's an online magazine, an e-zine, whatever we're calling it these days, called ADD-itude, so add-itude instead of attitude. It's a wonderful resource for families, parents, individuals who experience living with ADHD. The other one is called CHADD, CHADD. Also, they're both .org. Excellent resources for families who are living with ADHD. And then 2 books that I would recommend. One is Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions. This is a really helpful tool. So that would be a parent's book. And this is for younger kids, Thriving with ADHD. And these are just both really excellent resources that families can access. And the opportunities and the possibilities are endless, because that child with ADHD often has a creative curiosity and a wonderful imagination. And we just need to look at the positives and maybe consider it a superpower instead of a liability.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate those resources as well. I love to stick resources up because I think it's something, when you're motivated, you want to find out more. So that's great.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. I really appreciate you taking the time to.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I know I've learned a lot, so that's been great.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
And just a reminder to click the like button if you like this and share it with someone that you think it would be an encouragement to. Also love to hear your comments. What are your thoughts on this topic? What are some of your challenges or things that have been helpful for you, even for resources? And just remember that we're doing Faith at Home, but we're not alone. Thank you for watching.